Yet there are among us still some who have dealings with the elves when they may, and ever and anon one will go in secret to Lórien, seldom to return. Not I, for I deem it perilous now for mortal man wilfully to seek out the elder people. Yet I envy you that have spoken with the White Lady. The Lady of Lórien, Galadriel, cried Sam. You should see her, indeed you should, sir. I am only a hobbit, and gardening's my job at home, sir, if you understand me, and I'm not much good at not at making it, a bit of comic rhyme perhaps now and again, you know, but not real poetry. So I can't tell you what I mean. It ought to be sung. You'd have to get Strider, Aragorn that is, or old Mr. Bilbo for that. But I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, sir. Lovely. Sometimes like a great tree in flower. Sometimes like a white daffodilly, small and slender-like. Hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost and the stars, proud and far off as a snow mountain, and as merry as any lass I ever saw with daisies in her hair in springtime. But that's a lot of nonsense, and all wide of my mark. Then she must be lovely indeed, said Faramir, perilously fair. I don't know about perilous, said Sam. It strikes me that folk take their peril with them into Lórien, and finds it there because they've brought it. But perhaps you could call her perilous, because she's so strong in herself. You could dash yourself to pieces on her like a ship on a rock, or drown yourself like a hobbit in a river. But neither rock nor river would be to blame. Now Bora, he stopped and went red in the face. Welcome, I'm Professor Rachel Fulton Brown, and this is The Forge of Tolkien. Who was the White Lady? If you were to describe her with poetry, not pretty, I like that I misread that just there. I'm not much good at poetry, says Sam, but if I were, oh, what I would describe her as. I wish I could make a song about her. Beautiful she is, lovely, sometimes like a great tree in flower, sometimes like a white daffodilly, small and slender-like, hard as diamonds, soft as moonlight. It seems like he's coming fairly close, and yet he's saying, I can't quite describe her. Now, if you've seen the movies, Galadriel is probably one of the characters that stuck with you most poignantly, because she is beautiful to look upon, her shining white in the moonlight. And yet, who is she? Well, in the movie she's the opening narrator, and we get glimpses, hints of her, clues, if you will, about who she is in The Lord of the Rings. But I put it to you that we're told, interestingly, very little about her. We first meet her in Lórien, where she lives, right, the forest, and the people, the company, subject to her examination, and she sort of gives them a bit of backstory of things that they have perhaps been curious about. So, for example, when her husband Celeborn is a little anxious about who it is that they have brought into Lórien, and Celeborn apologizes, not realizing exactly what peril they've been in, and he's spoken harshly to Gimli and has now been corrected. And he explains, I spoke in the trouble of my heart, and promises to help them as they will. So it's given that Celeborn doesn't see as much or know as much as Galadriel, and Galadriel explains that she in fact does know. Your quest is known to us, said Galadriel, looking at Frodo, but we will not speak of it. We will not hear speak of it more openly. Presumably we learn later that it's her mirror that she has that has given her this knowledge, but at this point she's not going to explain. However, she does sort of hint at more of her own context in one of those wonderful elusive passages that point to the deep history that the elves are participating in, and the hobbits and the men only catch glimpses of. And she insists that they need to that Celeborn, I'm not saying meant well, but yet not in vain will it prove maybe that you came to this land seeking aid, as Gandalf himself plainly purposed. For the Lord of the Galadrim, that's her husband Celeborn, is accounted the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, and a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted. For ere the fall of Nargothrond, or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains, and together through the ages of the world we have fought the long defeat. There's an awful lot packed into that allusion, that Celeborn has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and Galadriel has lived with him for years uncounted. For ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin, I passed over the mountains, and together through the ages of the world we have fought the long defeat. What does she mean? What's Nargothrond? Gondolin? Have we heard of those places in detail in the Lord of the Rings? They're place names that are constantly off stage and pointed to. And here Galadriel is saying she's older than those stories. It was I who first summoned the White Council, and if my designs had not gone amiss, it would have been governed by Gandalf the Grey, and then mayhap things would have gone otherwise. But even now there is hope left. I will not give you counsel, saying do this or do that, for not in doing or contriving, nor in choosing between this course and another can I avail, but only in knowing what is, what was, and is, and in part also what shall be. But this I will say to you, your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fail to the ruin of all. Yet hope remains while all the company is true. She's the one now, although she's said that her husband is considered the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, she's the one who called the White Council. She's the one behind so much of the council that Gandalf has been working on. She's the one who has still messages of hope. And then she examines all of them, holds them with her eyes, and in silence looks searchingly at each of them in turn. None save Legolas and Aragorn could long endure her glance. Sam quickly blushed and hung his head, and at length she released them from her eyes. So, and then we know from the conversation they have afterwards that she's put each of them to a kind of test. Okay, so she's very, very old. She's lived with Celeborn in Middle-earth for a very long time. She is the one who summons the Council of the Wise, and the one who carries hope and is able to look into people's hearts. We find out a few other fairly significant things about her when she calls Sam and Frodo and invites them to look in her mirror. And we've talked about her mirror before as the kind of dream vision, or is it showing them what may come to pass? What kind of magic is the mirror? While they're in her bower, as it were, and gazing into the mirror, they learn that she is in fact one of the elvish ring bearers, and it's the ring that Frodo is able to see, but Sam just thinks it's the star shining through her hands. And she explains that yes, Frodo as ring bearer can see her ring, and it's the ring of adamant, Ninya, which we know from other contexts is the ring of water. So she is she has a diamond ring, and it's that ring, we understand, that's enabled her, among other things, to preserve Lórien and to keep her sway over her own realm. So now she's a ruler of some sort and a lady of great power, and it's at this moment, which is the great scene in the movie, right, that she herself is given a test and passes, right? And I want you to attend to what happens in this scene very closely. So she's explained that Sauron suspects that she is the keeper of Ninya, and that she explains things like, yet could I wish were it of any avail that the One Ring had never been wrought or had remained forever lost. And Frodo describes her thus: you are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel. I will give you the one ring if you ask for it. It's too great a matter for me. You are wise and fearless and fair. And so he offers her the ring, and she laughs with a sudden clear laugh. Wise! Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently are you revenged for my testing of your heart. At our first meeting, you begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I had pondered what I might do should the great ring come into my hands, and behold, it was brought into my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would not that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of his ring, if I had taken it by force or fear from my guests? Now yet it comes, you will give me the ring freely. In the place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. I'm not as good as Kate Blanchett. Those lines if she had a bit of CGI help, right? All shall love me and despair. I shall be queen. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illumined her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test, she said. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. What test had she just passed, and why was she put to this test? Right? It's like I've been trying to make you pay attention to all of the ways in which she's described over and over and over. There's one word that keeps coming up, wise, but she's also wise and beautiful, and the test is that in the place of the Dark Lord you would set up a queen. Beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me, and not hope, but despair. Who is Galadriel? Where does she come from? It's like, fine, she's given this test. She has the ring. It's a ring bearer test. Of course it's given to her. What I want to think about today is there of course in here, who exactly is Galadriel? There is some way in which she is, multiple people are put to the test of Sauron's ring, right? And Sam and Frodo. Frodo fails the test. Sam passes the test. It's interesting that it's Frodo in this scene that can see her ring, and Sam who can't and thinks it's just a star. And of course, in the long run, it's going to be Sam the gardener, whom she offered, soil to in the gift that she gave, who's able to resist the ring ultimately. But here is Galadriel, the single most powerful character to be tempted by the ring in this way, and described as wise. Who is she? Well, as usual, we have other readers making guesses, and one of the most famous guesses was made by one of Tolkien's Catholic friends, right? This is Robert Murray, who's a Jesuit, grandson of Sir James Murray, the founder of the Oxford English Dictionary. See Mel Gibson movie about that. And a close friend of the Tolkien family. He'd read part of The Lord of the Rings in galley proofs and typescript and sent Tolkien some comments. This is a letter from 1953, so before the book is published. And he says, in his own letter, Robert Murray said, he wrote that the book left him with a strong sense of a positive compatibility with the order of grace, and this is a fairly famous comparison, so I'm expecting you to not be terrifically surprised, and compared the image of Galadriel to that of the Virgin Mary. Was Father Murray right? Is Galadriel, the lady, the queen, an image of Our Lady? Well, Tolkien was flattered, right? And he says, I've been cheered especially by what you've said. His usual self-effacing note is like, oh, you praise me so much, but I've been cheered especially by what you've said this time and before, because you are more perceptive, especially in some directions, than anyone else. And I think I know exactly what you mean by the order of grace, and of course, by your references to Our Lady, upon which all my own small perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. So either Tolkien is just happy. I mean, talking to the grandson of the founder of the Oxford English Dictionary, this is an interesting friendship, of course, because Tolkien's first job had been working for the Oxford English Dictionary. We've talked about his philology and his love of language, and so the sense that he's talking to someone who gets it, right, is very, very strong here. And of course, in the scene that we've just read, Galadriel is both queen and diminished, right? So both majesty and simplicity, and Tolkien here acknowledges that is where his image of, it makes sense for him that our references to Our Lady, that it is Galadriel, and then makes the single most definitive admission of the religiosity of the novel that we have, right? And it's interesting that it comes in this context, that Father Murray has just said, Galadriel reminds me of Our Lady, and Tolkien says, yes, you're right, the beauty and simplicity, the beauty and majesty and simplicity is founded in the image of Our Lady, and he says, the Lord of the Rings is, of course, another of those of courses, is, of course, a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. Right, so here it is. Our Lady, Galadriel, this is a Catholic work consciously now. And last episode we were talking about the problem of the incarnation and why it's not in the story, and we know that Tolkien wrestled with this problem of the artist entering into his creation, and here he just seems, it's like, yes, it is Catholic. And yet, quote, that is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion, to cults or practices in the imaginary world. Okay, so on the one hand, this image of Galadriel is drawing on Our Lady, and therefore the Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, and therefore that's why there's no references to religion. For the religious element is absorbed into the story and its symbolism. Okay, so if we're finding images that seem to suggest to us characters or themes from Christianity in Lord of the Rings, that's okay. They're supposed to be there. However, that is very clumsily put and sounds more self-important than I feel. For as a matter of fact, I've consciously planned very little, and should chiefly be grateful for having been brought up since I was 8 in a faith that has nourished me and taught me all the little that I know, and that I owe to my mother, who clung to her conversion and died young, largely through the hardships of poverty resulting from it. This is a huge bundle of powerful wrestling that Tolkien is in, right? Because he's writing to the grandson of the founder of the Oxford English Dictionary, and he is flattered that Murray has liked the book, and this is before it's been published, so he's in that that time when he's still really anxious about how people are going to receive it. He says, yes, it's fundamentally religious and Catholic, and I took all the references out of religion because it's all so imbued with it, and it's basically about my mom, who died, abandoned by her family for her conversion to Catholicism. Oh my goodness. And this is all bound up in Galadriel. This is Tolkien's mother, Our Lady. That's it's one of those moments when I find myself nearly weeping, because has he given we'd say his wife Edith is Luthien, possibly. Is Galadriel the image of his mother? Well, there are interesting clues sort of sprinkled throughout the letters, and this is sort of one of those big problems. It's like he never quite completely explains anything, as usual, and bants around, but we'll say sort of interesting kind of throwaway, not really explanations. This is in a letter to Naomi Mitchison, who'd been reading the page proofs and just talking about Shelob and Spider, and oh yes, Galadriel is old, or older than Shelob. Oh good. So, and that's of course interesting. You realize all of this is bound up in the events that play out in the Lord of the Rings. So Galadriel's phial, the light from the star that she gives to Frodo, which then Sam uses to help drive Sam uses to drive off Shelob when Shelob has stung his master. Now I've forgotten that scene. You're going to learn that Tolkien couldn't keep any of this straight either, right? Okay, so the phial that Galadriel gives the hobbits, they use to drive off Shelob, and it's, the light that blinds Shelob momentarily, at least, is given to them by someone older than Shelob. It's interesting that that's the comparison. So Galadriel in her forest is like the anti-Shelob. Galadriel gives light. Shelob, we learn, is a descendant of a Goliant who drank the light of the trees. Okay, so there's a tree in the light imagery bound up here. Galadriel, this is still in the letter to Naomi Mitchison, is the last remaining of the great among the high elves. Okay, so Celeborn, who Galadriel is explained is the oldest of the elves of Middle-earth, is different from Galadriel, and we'll find out exactly why. Galadriel is the last remaining of the great among the high elves, and awoke in Eldamar beyond the sea, long before Ungoliante came to Middle-earth and produced her broods there. Galadriel goes back to before. So, but wait, that makes her sense. She's the light. She's older than Shelob. She's seen the light of the trees. She knows what the light is that she has in her phial that she gives to the hobbits. It'd be a light when all other lights have gone out. Why does she have the test to pass? Well, they're continuing on with our hints and our clues. There's another letter from some years later, 20 years later, and it seems, readers not having the Silmarillion, because it was not published until after Tolkien died, and readers kept writing him, and they're curious about Galadriel. She doesn't make any sense. Is she the Virgin Mary? Well, she's older than Shelob. Here's an excerpt from a letter to a Mrs. Ruth Austin from 1971, where Tolkien says, "I was particularly interested in your remarks about Galadriel. I think it is true that I owe much of this character to Christian and Catholic teaching and imagination about Mary." Again, that emphasis on Mary. But actually, oh, wait, okay. So people keep picking up on the potentially Marian imagery in Galadriel, and Tolkien, I think sometimes you agree with writers, you agree with fans of your work who suggests stuff and then you say, but that's not really what I meant, right? So all of his, of course, is to Father Murray. Of course, she's like Mary. Of course, I'm, drawing on images of Our Lady for my understanding of beauty and its majesty and simplicity. And here, Mrs. Ruth Austin has written to him. It's like, oh, she seems so much like Our Lady. And he says, no, well, yes, but actually Galadriel was a penitent. Well, that doesn't fit with Our Lady, right? Because, well, if Tolkien's Catholic, he understands that Mary was without sin. So how could Galadriel be a penitent? In her youth, a leader in the rebellion against the Valar, the angelic guardians. Well, he didn't tell Father Murray that, right? At the end of the First Age, she proudly refused forgiveness or permission to return. She was pardoned because of her resistance to the final and overwhelming temptation to take the ring for herself. Okay, so there's something going on with Galadriel. When she passes the test, it's not simply, I'm powerful, I resisted the ring. She wanted to be queen. And here the offer comes to her, and she could have been that great lady, beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, and therefore she's passed more than just a test of the ring. She's passed a test that goes back to, in fact, something she did in her youth. Well, who was she? Now, there are more clues in the letters, but I'm going to hold that for a second, because Tolkien kind of changes his mind. At this point, he's still telling people, yes, she's like Our Lady. She's like Our Lady, and she was a penitent. Who was she? Well, the Silmarillion comes out, and we start learning a bit more about Galadriel, and yet, interestingly, given that she's the central character in the Lord of the Rings that she is, you'd think, it's like when the Silmarillion came out, right, we're going to finally find out who was Galadriel. Well, it's complicated. Okay, so one, we learn that she's the daughter of Finarfin, and the sister, therefore, of Finrod the Faithful, who is afterwards named Felagund, Lord of Caves. She's also sister of Orodreth, Angrod, and Egnor. And these four were as close in friendship with the sons of Fingolfin as though they were all brothers. A sister they had, Galadriel, most beautiful of all the house of Finwë. Her hair was lit with gold as though it had caught in a mesh of the radiance of Lorelin. All right, so one, she's if you imagine the elves as blonde, it's because of Galadriel. And what's interesting is it's in fact only these children, these sons and daughter of Finwë that are blonde, right? Because their mother is Indis, who is a Vanyar, whereas Finwë, if you remember the previous 3 episodes, Finwë is the father of Fëanor, right? Which makes Galadriel, therefore, not only the sister of Finrod Felagund, Lord of the Caves, whom, if you remember from the dog episode, is the great friend of Beren and is killed by Sauron's werewolf in the dungeons. Sorry, I've lost track of it. See, this is why I say keeping track of all these. I have it all written out for you, and I'm hoping to make this clear. So, Finwë is the father of Fëanor, the son of Miriel, who dies giving birth to Fëanor. And the big debate is over whether Finwë therefore can remarry or not, because the elves are not really supposed to remarry, and Miriel her body's not corrupting, it's gone to sleep under a tree. So can he remarry? And there's the big judgment that the Valar make on whether or not that's appropriate. And he does remarry Indis. Finwë's of the Noldor, and they're dark, but Indis is of the Vanyar, and they're light. And so Galadriel has this golden hair, as do her brothers, right? So that's very significant. And that she's the half brother, the half sister. Wait, sorry, I've like, her father is the half brother of Fëanor. I knew I got this wrong. Let's start over. Her father is the half brother of Fëanor. She's the granddaughter of Finwë, and therefore I'm not sure what her relation. Her father is the half brother of Fëanor. So Fëanor is her half uncle. In any case, okay. I'm sorry. I gumbled all. I really wrote that all out. See, I got it written all out, and it still came out wrong. Finwë had married Muriel, and he had Fëanor. He married Indus, and they have Finarfin, who marries Eärwen, who has 4 sons and 1 daughter, and they're all blonde because their grandmother Indus was blonde. Okay. Right. So Galadriel is born in Valinor of her grandfather's second marriage. She's born in Valinor. So she awakes under the light of the trees. She is, it's like, not only is her hair as beautiful as the tree of Lórien, she herself is a child of the blessed land, of the blessed realm. You wonder how she ended up in Middle Earth, right? That's significant. Okay, so she is in fact related to Fëanor, kin of Fëanor, but she never takes the oath, which is a sort of interesting specificity. And yet she's in Middle Earth, right? She's not in Valinor. She goes with Fëanor and her other kin, the other Noldor, when Fëanor takes his oath to get back the Silmarils. And it's interesting because her father tries to calm everything down when Fëanor is swearing his oaths, his terrible oath, and it doesn't work. And saying Finrod was with Turgon, his friend, so they're taking the oaths. But Galadriel, this is recall back when Fëanor is taken the oath to get back the Silmarils, and that if anybody else who should keep or take a Silmaril, other than his kin, that they should be, they would be pursued with vengeance, right? So interestingly, she does not take that oath, and yet she goes with them anyway. And this is like, it's interesting that Tolkien tried to give her like an out, but on the other hand, she still goes with them. Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand that day, tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oaths she swore, but the words of Fëanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart, for she yearned to see the wide unguarded lands and to rule there a realm at her own will. So, on the one hand, she doesn't take the oath to keep vengeance against anybody who has the Silmarils other than Fëanor and his kin. Yet, on the other hand, she's prideful enough to want to go with everybody else to get her own realm, which is very, very interesting. She goes with them into Middle-earth, and there goes to live along with her brother Finrod in Doriath, right? And they are through their phooey. Okay, Olwe is related to. Do you care? I care. I care just right, just enough to try to. Okay, so Olwe is their grandfather through their mother, Elwyn. And Olwa's brother, is married to Melian, who's a Maya. Elwa is known as Thingol. They are the parents of Luthien. Galadriel and her brother Finrod go to live in Doriath, which is where Elwa or Thingol and Melian are living. And that's in Middle-earth. And Elwa or Thingol has never left Middle-earth to go to Valinor at all, right? So even though Finrod and Galadriel are related to, were born in Valinor, they end up in Middle-earth living in Doriath with their kinsfolk. And there Finrod, which is how he ends up being called Lord of Caves, Felagund, is very much impressed with Thingol's palace, as it were, Menegroth, which is this underground treasury. We're going to find out more about that in the future. Finrod was filled with wonder at the strength and majesty of Menegroth, his treasuries and armories, and its many pillared halls of stone. And so he wants his own palace like that, and that's where, and he builds Nargothrond, right? So now we know what Nargothrond is, mentioned in the Lord of the Rings. It's Galadriel's brother's underground fortress, which he builds in the caverns of Narog, established there deep halls and armories after the fashion of the mansions of Menegroth, and that stronghold was called Nargothrond. Finrod also establishes relationships with the dwarves, who make him a fabulous necklace, Naglamir, the necklace of the dwarves, most renowned of works in the Elder Days. Okay, so now Galadriel and Finrod become entangled in the story, which is going to be the story of Beren and Luthien, by way of living with their kinsfolk in Doriath and mimicking their projects, right? Finrod goes to live in Nargothrond, but Galadriel stays in Doriath and marries Celeborn, kinsman of Thingol, and falls in love with him, right? Now, you'd think, given how important Galadriel and Celeborn are in the Lord of the Rings, that you'd have some story about their courtship and marriage and stuff like that. Apparently not, right? We don't have the full story of how they get married. They just end up married in the Silmarillion, so that Galadriel is simply living there in Doriath and talking to Melian, who is Luthien's mother. Got all that? And what's interesting about this conversation with Melian is, at first it seems Galadriel hasn't been telling them the whole truth. She's sort of given them to understand that the reason the Noldor came back from Valinor had, something to do with something, right? And Melian starts saying, I think there's more than you're telling us. A shadow lies over all the land of Aman and reaches far out to the sea. Why will you not tell me more? And Galadriel says, oh, well, I'd rather forget all that, right? I would take what joy is left here, untroubled my memory. Melian pushes her and gets Galadriel to explain about the Silmarils, but Galadriel doesn't tell her about the oath, right? Nor does she tell Melian about the kinslaying, nor of the burning of the ships that Fëanor stole from his kinfolk when they killed them. It's an interesting sort of, what is it exactly that Galadriel has to be penitent for? Well, one, she's not willing at the outset to, in fact, tell even Melian the whole truth about what had happened. And neither over the course of the Silmarillion do we get that much more information about how Galadriel made her decisions. We have at one point simply mentioning that Celeborn had wedded Lady Galadriel, and it's literally parenthetical, mentioning their son Dori. It doesn't matter, right? It's all parenthetical, and in fact very, very vague, right? So that you'd think by the end of the story, well, that this would be in some way highlighted, and yet again we've simply left Galadriel sort of in the background. And this is the way the the Silmarillion itself ends, right? That the Silmarils, we'll learn more about them with Arundel, right? But the Silmarils have found their homes in the air, in the airs of heaven, the fires of the heart of the earth, of the world, and one in deep waters. And lots of the Eldar go back to Valinor after the Silmarils are lost again, as it were, or found again. But not all of them leave, and at this point you think, well, the Silmarillion ends, but Galadriel stays because she's married to Celeborn. And what's interesting about Celeborn, since he's a kinsman of Thingol and had never left Middle-earth in the first place, this is how Celeborn can be called the wisest of the elves of Middle-earth, whereas Galadriel is considered the wisest of all, because she has been further west than Celeborn himself. And when the Eldar leave at the end of the First Age, she doesn't. Yet not all the Eldalia were willing to forsake the hitherlands where they had long suffered and long dwelt, and some lingered many an age in Middle-earth. Among those were Círdan the shipwright and Celeborn of Doriath with Galadriel his wife, who alone remained of those who led the Noldor to exile in Beleriand. Right? So she is, yet again, she's just somehow still there. And there's not much, there's no more story. Now, what I'm finding sort of wonderful and fascinating and puzzling is how it is, of all of the characters that Tolkien invented, he didn't develop Galadriel further, right? That he didn't give more sense of the struggle that she had, or the backstory that she had, of the test that is absolutely central to the Lord of the Rings, right? That she could have become the queen. Well, we do have a little note that Christopher publishes in the Unfinished Tales, right? Which he says was very late and a part of, in fact, another essay. This certainly written after the publication of The Road Goes Ever On, another late work, 1968, which at least summarizes the biography of Galadriel, right? If you say this is the sort of biographical entry, compiling who it is she is. There are other notes, longer notes, which are even more confusing and go on and on and on about Galadriel and Celeborn setting up their kingdom in Lórien. But this is the most sort of developed character sketch that we seem to have. Galadriel and her brother Finrod were the children of Finarfin, the second son of Indus. Finarfin was of his mother's kind in mind and body, having the golden hair of the Vanyar, their noble and gentle temper, and their love of the Valar. As well as he could, he kept aloof from the strife of his brothers and their estrangement from the Valar, and he often sought peace among the Teleri whose language he learned. He wedded Eärwen, the daughter of King Olwe of Alcalonda, and his children were thus the kin of King Elu Thingol of Doriath and Beleriand, for he was the brother of Olwe, and this kinship influenced their decision to join in the exile, and proved of great importance later in Beleriand. Finrod was like his father in his fair face and golden hair, and also a noble and generous heart, though he had the high courage of the Noldor in his youth, and in his youth their eagerness and unrest. And he had also from his Telerin mother a love of the sea, and dreams of far lands that he had never seen. Galadriel was the greatest of the Noldor, except Fëanor maybe, though she was wiser than he, and her wisdom increased with the long years. Her mother name was Nerwin, man-maiden, and she grew to be tall beyond the measure even of the women of the Noldor. She was strong of body, mind, and will, a match for both the lore masters and athletes of the Eldar in the days of their youth. Even among the Eldar she was accounted beautiful, and her hair was held a marvel unmatched. It was golden like the hair of her father and of her foremother Indus, but richer and more radiant, for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother. And the Eldar said that the light of the two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, had been snared in her tresses. Many thought that this saying first gave to Feanor the thought of imprisoning and blending the light of the trees that later took shape in his hands as the Silmarils. For Feanor beheld the hair of Galadriel with wonder and delight. He begged 3 times for a tress, but Galadriel would not give him even 1 hair. These 2 kinsfolk, the greatest of the Eldar of Valinor, were unfriends forever. Galadriel was born in the bliss of Valinor, but it was not long in the reckoning of the Blessed Realm before that was dimmed, and thereafter she had no peace within. For in that testing time, amid the strife of the Noldor, she was drawn this way and that. She was proud, strong, and self-willed, as were all the descendants of Finwë save Finarfin. And like her brother Finrod, of all her kin the nearest to her heart, she had dreams of far lands and dominions that might be her own to order as she would without tutelage. Yet deeper still there dwelt in her the noble and generous spirit of the Vanyar, and a reverence for the Valar that she could not forget. From her earliest years she had a marvelous gift of insight into the minds of others, but judged them with mercy and understanding, and she withheld her goodwill from none save only Feanor. In him she perceived a darkness that she hated and feared, though she did not perceive that the shadow of the same evil had fallen upon the minds of all the Noldor, and upon her own. So it came to pass that when the light of Valinor failed, forever as the Noldor thought, she joined the rebellion against the Valar, who commanded them to stay, and once she had set foot upon that road of exile, she would not relent, but rejected the last message of the Valar, and came under the doom of Mandos. Even after the merciless assault upon the Teleri, and the rape of their ships, though she fought fiercely against Feanor in defense of her mother's kin, she did not turn back. Her pride was unwilling to return, a defeated suppliant for pardon. But now she burned with desire to follow Feanor with her anger to whatever lands he might come, and to thwart him in all ways that she could. Pride still moved her when, at the end of the Eldar days, after the final overthrow of Morgoth, she refused the pardon of the Valar for all who had fought against him, and remained in Middle-earth. It was not until 2 long ages more had passed, when at last all that she had desired in her youth came to her hand, the ring of power, and the dominion of Middle-earth of which she had dreamed, that her wisdom was full-grown, and she rejected it, and passing the last test, departed from Middle-earth forever. Okay, so that's everything that we've figured out, right, over the hints that are in the Lord of the Rings and there in the Silmarillion. And how on earth did this image ever suggest to someone the Virgin Mary? Right? She is almost literally the opposite of everything we know about Mary. She's full of pride. She longs for dominion. She carries with her this desire for revenge. She is, beautiful, right? But if you put together, Tolkien knew all of this when he was writing The Lord of the Rings, right? Because obviously we always know that he has all these notes, and the Silmarillion is kind of there constantly, right, for him, so that he drops hints of the Silmarillion story into The Lord of the Rings. So it's not like he wrote The Lord of the Rings and put Galadriel in it by accident. She's a central figure of his imagining of the tension that the Valar have with the Noldor have with the Valar, and that what she wanted most is what the test comes to her, right? She wanted to be a queen, beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the light. She wanted to be power, and she passes the test, and that's why she's in fact saved in this moment. And so if there's grace there, it's in that ability that she has at that moment of testing to say no to the very thing that she'd been longing for all along, that she'd abandoned Valinor for when the light of the trees went out. And it's obviously interesting in telling that what Feanor wanted in making the Silmarils was her hair, which he then, in gifting Gimli the strands of hair that he asks for, and that, unsurprisingly, he then takes and says he's going to put in a crystal container, right? He basically makes the Silmaril that Feanor couldn't, because he takes Galadriel's living tresses and encases their light in the crystal, just as Feanor had wanted to capture the light of the trees and put them in the Silmarils. So Galadriel is the living Silmaril with the gem, the ring of adamant, right? So the diamond ring, which catches the light of the Silmaril as she holds up her hand when she's tempted with the ring. She is this, yet again, I mean, okay, you're going to, this feeling that I'm hopefully giving you is like every single image that we look at in Tolkien is all the other images combined, right? Here is Galadriel as the living gemstone that we've been talking about, of the the Silmarils and the trees, and she lives in trees, right? She actually, and think back to what Sam had said he wanted to say about her, right? How he wanted to sing a song about her. If he were any good at poetry, he would describe her as like a great tree and flower, sometimes like a white daffodilly, hard as diamond, soft as moonlight, warm as sunlight, cold as frost and the stars. She's all of these images of the heavenly and earthly creatures. She's a star, she's a tree, she's like diamond, she's wise. Who is she? And why, given that the last thing she does is give birth to the Savior, right? It's like there is, you'd think if she was going to be an image of Mary, that her child at least would be significant. It's like her child is Arwen, who marries Aragorn, which is significant, but they're not cast in any way as directly the saviors, right, of Middle Earth. So who is she? Why would Father, this is where I've hoped to get you, right? Why would Father Murray say that Galadriel reminded him of Our Lady, and Tolkien say, yes, that makes sense, because all, how did he put it? Let's see, let me get this language right. I'm letting you absorb all of that, right? That Tolkien agreed that the descriptions of Our Lady were that upon which all my own perception of beauty, both in majesty and simplicity, is founded. And yet there is zero in the character, in the story, in the testing of Galadriel that suggests Our Lady. How could you possibly read Galadriel as an image of the Virgin Mary? And why would readers even 20 years into the publication still seemingly be suggesting that Galadriel could have any relationship with the Virgin Mary? Well, it's of course because there's some other texts in the background that are used in the Marian liturgies to describe her. But they're in the Old Testament, and they're not originally or overtly describing, well, they are describing the Mother of the Lord. That's it. It's hard sometimes for people now to read them as about the Virgin Mary, because we've forgotten these associations in the mystery. And to explain all that, you need to read my book, Mary and the Art of Prayer, and listen to all my other videos. However, these are texts that are associated with the Virgin Mary, and I put to you That's how I've been trying to show you this over and over and over again. The way Tolkien is constantly thinking is through the scriptures, and it's through the imagery of things like in Genesis or the books of Enoch with the angels and creation. He's infused constantly with the imagery of the scriptures, but it's coming from, I put it to you, so most generally, it's coming to him from the liturgy. And if he's saying to you, these are the images, this image of beauty that I have the Virgin Mary, he's going to be thinking about these texts. Let me see if you can guess who this is. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his ways, before he made anything from the beginning. I was set up from eternity and of old before the earth was made. The depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived. Neither had the fountains of waters as yet sprung out. The mountains with their huge bulk had not as yet been established. Before the hills I was brought forth. He had not yet made the earth, nor the rivers, nor the poles of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was present. And when with a certain law encompassing enclosed the depths, when he established the sky above and poised the fountains of waters, when he compassed the sea with its bounds and set a law to the waters that they should not pass their limits, when he balanced the foundations of the earth, I was with him, forming all things, and was delighted every day, playing before him at all times, playing in the world. My delights were to be with the children of men. Now that, if you know your scriptures well, is Proverbs 8, 22 through 31, famously read throughout the Middle Ages in the liturgies of the Virgin Mary, and it's wisdom. Now, if you're Catholic and you're worrying about where the story, the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception comes from, largely it comes, well, lots of things, layers, but the proof text is typically taken, this one, from Proverbs, because somehow wisdom, with whom Mary is identified by way of these scriptures that I'm going to be sharing with you right now, as being with the Lord before all creation. And you can say conception, he has her planned in his mind. And if you consider that, if you're Presbyterian or Protestant and you believe in predetermination, just say she's predetermined, and you're closer to the sense. But that it's interesting that one of the things that we saw that Tolkien says about Galadriel is she's like older than Shelob, right? She's there at the beginning, and that she was born in the holy realm. She's born in Valinor. She's born in the blessed realm. She's born under the tree. She's born in the light. There are ways in which that makes her curiously very like wisdom in this problem. Like she's born into the light and delighting in the light with at least the Valar at the beginning, right? So there's that element. The playfulness is a very significant element of the imagery of wisdom, right? That she is the joy and the delight. And when Sam is saying that he doesn't know how to describe her because she's both grand and sort of childlike, this delighting before the throne, that wisdom has this childlike element. She's other things though, right? We say she is like a tree. Then the Creator of all things commanded and said to me, and he that made me rested in my tabernacle. And he said to me, let thy dwelling be in Jacob, and thy inheritance in Israel, and take root in my elect. From the beginning, and before the world was I created, and unto the world to come I shall not cease to be, and in the holy dwelling place I have ministered before him. And so was I established in Zion, and in the holy city likewise I rested, and my power was in Jerusalem. And I took root in an honorable people, and in the portion of my God his inheritance, and my abode is in the full assembly of saints. I was exalted like a cedar in Lebanon, and as a cypress tree on Mount Zion. I was exalted like a palm tree in Cades, and as a rose plant in Jericho. As a fair olive tree in the plains, and as a plane tree by the water in the streets, was I exalted. I gave a sweet smell like cinnamon, and aromatical balm. I yielded a sweet odor like the best myrrh. And I perfumed my dwelling as storax and galbanum and onyx and aloes, and as the frankincense not cut, and my odor as the purest balm. I have stretched out my branches as the turpentine tree, and my branches are of honor and grace. As the vine I have brought forth a pleasant odor, and my flowers are the fruit of honor and riches. I am the mother of fair love, and of fear, and of knowledge, and of holy hope. In me is all grace of the way and of the truth. In me is all hope of life and of virtue. Come over to me, all ye that desire me, and be filled with my fruits, for my spirit is sweet above honey, and my inheritance above honey and the honeycomb. My memory is unto everlasting generations. They that eat me shall yet hunger, they that drink me shall yet thirst. He that hearkeneth to me shall not be confounded, and they that work by me shall not sin. They that explain me shall have life everlasting. That's Ecclesiasticus 24, and that entire passage is commented on throughout the Middle Ages as describing the Virgin Mary. And the lessons, particularly, so was I established in Zion and in the holy city. Likewise I rested, and my power was in Jerusalem. And he that made me rested in my tabernacle. Those are taken as images of, the Creator resting in his tabernacle, the Creator taking his abode up in the Virgin Mary. But the tree imagery, right? It's like thinking about all of the things that Sam keeps wanting to say. And consider, so Galadriel's hair is like the light of the trees. Galadriel is born in the light of the trees. Galadriel, when the hobbits and the other members of the fellowship meet her, is living among the trees. She's a tree lady, right? And here we have, this is wisdom describing herself, again, as she is in Proverbs, from the beginning, and I think it's sort of interesting that Tolkien sets Galadriel, as we've said, she's born in Valinor, she arises in the light in the holy city, literally in the holy city, in the city of the Valar, that she then becomes, Lórien is, there's a lot of double naming in the relationships that Galadriel has. So her husband is Celeborn, but Celeborn is also a tree, right? So Celeborn is the kinsman of Thingol and Doriath, but Celeborn is also the tree of silver that's a scion, shoot out of Galadriel, which is the tree that was given to the elves to be an image of Telperion. So Galadriel basically marries a tree, right? She marries Celeborn the tree, who is also then the wise elf in Middle Earth. That she and Celeborn the tree live in Lórien in Middle Earth, or Lothlórien, flower of Lórien, is confusing in name terms, because Lórien is also the garden of Irmo in Valinor, right? So it's like she carries with her in her planting of trees. Remember, what she gives to Sam in the long run is a seed that he then plants lots of Malorn trees in the Shire with. That she has all of these tree associations, just like wisdom, right? My guess is, because Father Murray is going to know all of these Marian references, or what he and Tolkien are both going to understand as Marian references, is that it's the wisdom imagery that they're thinking about as particularly Marian. Not things like, I have seen essays where, for example, you get the Litany of Loreto and all of the different titles of Mary, and some of those seem to be very closely associated with Galadriel. Well, that's kind of an accident, because you have to get through wisdom. Because here's Mary, here's Galadriel, here's wisdom. You have to get through wisdom to make the Marian images, things about her as the Tower of David and the Ark of the Covenant and all the tree imagery. Her mirror, we're going to get to the mirror image in a second. All of that is Old Testament imagery of Mary that then is folded into this character of Galadriel, who is, I'm trying to say that she was basically wisdom, which, if you're listening to what we kept saying, that she had, Galadriel was the greatest of the Noldor, except Feanor maybe, though she was wiser than he, and her wisdom increased with the long years. And it's when she passes the test with refusing the ring that her wisdom was full grown and she rejected it. I think Father Murray and Tolkien are both responding to the lady as wisdom, ultimately, right? So she's all that tree imagery, and these actual references to her as, I mean, that she's perilous, right? But that there's fear. I thought of it when I was reading the Ecclesiasticus. You can hear it in when Frodo had said to her, "You are wise and fearless and fair," right? And that she had, it's her in whom they have hope. $679, right? These descriptions of wisdom come over and over and over again. I'm sorry, now I'm forgetting where. Figure it out, right? It's like that passage where she's talking about, I am the mother of fair love and of fear and of knowledge and of holy hope. That she is the one that carries all of these references to wisdom, and therefore we should not be surprised that wisdom has a mirror, right? This is the Book of Wisdom, chapter 7, and I think if again read throughout the Middle Ages as references to the Virgin Mary, and if when people, they often ask me, how do we model ourselves on Mary? How do we learn to be like Mary? And Mary's primary virtues, as described in the Gospels, is one, her consent, as Christians understand it, to the incarnation, that the angel comes to her and it says that she's going to be mother of the Son of the Most High, and she says, "Let it be to me." But throughout the Middle Ages, we have these great repertoires of her virtues, and it's like, well, how do you know what her virtues are? There aren't that many. She's not given that many adjectives in the New Testament, and so why would we know what she's like? Well, a lot of it comes from, because we know what wisdom is like. For in her is the spirit of understanding, holy one, manifold, subtle, eloquent, active, undefiled, sure, sweet, loving that which is good, quick, which nothing hindereth, beneficent, gentle, kind, steadfast, assured, secure, having all power, overseeing all things, and containing all spirits, intelligible, pure, subtle. For wisdom is more active than all active things, and reacheth everywhere by reason of her purity. Okay, so get a hold of the list of attributes and virtues, right? And these, of course, are used in medieval descriptions of Mary, and therefore will be familiar to the devout, because, I mean, they get detached from the scriptural descriptions, but they're all, as I've shown in my own scholarship, associated very, very closely with Mary throughout the commentary literature, and they know them because they're reading them in the liturgy, right? So Tolkien, when he's trying to describe Galadriel and saying he has of her all of the images of Mary's beauty, he's going to have to be dependent ultimately on these descriptions of wisdom, which is therefore, I think, why he describes Galadriel as wise all the time, and why Galadriel suggested the Virgin Mary, right? For wisdom is more active than all active things and reaches everywhere by reason of her purity. For she is a vapor of the power of God, and a certain pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty God, and thereto no defileth thing cometh into her. For she is the brightness of eternal light, and the unspotted mirror of God's majesty, and the image of his goodness. Consider what is associated with Galadriel, right? Light, brightness. Her hair reflects is the light, this living light of the trees. And of course, what she has that mirror in which she can see what was, what is, what may be. She is mirror and light. Those are going to suggest to Christian readers familiar with the Marian liturgy, Mary, but they're actually descriptions which Tolkien would have appreciated and known, I think, which is probably why he's kind of always hedging it. They're describing wisdom, who is the mother of fair love and fear and of hope. So thus far we've had Proverbs and Ecclesiasticus and Wisdom. There's one further great text that is used to describe Mary throughout the Middle Ages. And it's the one that I hear in the description that Galadriel gives of herself, what she wanted in assuming the ring. I mean, I think you should maybe Galadriel wanted to be queen. Galadriel wanted to be like Our Lady. And that was her temptation, which is interesting. When she says, I shall be dark, but beautiful and terrible. There's several passages. Here's the fuller description. How beautiful art thou, my love, how beautiful art thou. Thy eyes are dove's eyes beside what is hid within. Thy hair is as a flock of goats which come up from Mount Galahad. Thy teeth as flocks of sheep that are shorn, which come up from the washing, all with twins, and there is none barren among them. Thy lips are as a scarlet lace, and thy speech sweet. Thy cheeks are as a piece of a pomegranate beside that which lieth hid within. Thy neck is as the Tower of David, which is built with bulwarks. 1,000 bucklers hang upon it, all the armor of valiant men. Thy two breasts like two young roes that are twins, which feed among the lilies. Till the day break and the shadows retire, I will go to the mountain of myrrh, and to the hill of frankincense. Thou art all fair, O my love, and there is not a spot in thee. That's Song of Songs, chapter 4, and that description of the bride gives us many of the images that we use about the Virgin Mary, including things like the Tower of David. Thinking about Galadriel as this great, military image, right? She's an athlete and wise. Here she is, with her golden hair, right? But strong of body, mind, and will, a match for both the lore masters and the athletes of the Eldar. That she's this valiant Athena-like goddess. Well, it's there in Wisdom, and it's there in this magnificence of the tower, hung with all the armor of valiant men, and then the phrase that absolutely every medieval Christian knew, who said her office or attended her feast, would have been able to associate with her, is this one. And it's chapter 6-9 in the Song of Songs. Well, maybe we'll start with 6-8 because I want to build up to this a little bit. Because you need to have been hearing this every day for your entire life, which is kind of what I've been doing since I've been studying the devotion to Mary for decades. And so when I hear these phrases, you can say like hope, and I'm like, oh yes, it's Ecclesiasticus 24, right? Fear and hope and knowledge. Ah, yes, there's wisdom. Similarly, this description of the bride in the Song of Songs, just it carries with it just cascades of references. One is my dove, my perfect, one is but one, she is the only one of her mother, the chosen of her that bore her. The daughters saw her and declared her most blessed, the queens and concubines, and they praised her. Who is she that cometh forth as the morning rising, fair as the moon, bright as the sun, terrible as an army set in array? There's other language in what Galadriel says, that to be fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning. All of this is references and imagery that is applied to Mary through the Old Testament references. There's lots of Psalms that I could show you, but this beautiful and terrible, right? Beautiful and terrible as the morning and night. Who is she that cometh forth as the morning rising? Morning, right? Fair as the moon, bright as the sun, terrible as an army set in array. When Galadriel, which is sort of interesting, when Galadriel passes the test not to become queen, she passes the test not to assume the attributes of Our Lady, which is really fascinating if you think about it, because it's in that moment that Father Murray and Tolkien and his other readers seem to have agreed that she is most like Mary, right? And we could say, well, okay, so Mary is, known for humility and would have, probably said no to being queen and is yet queen. There's an interesting, just as Tolkien refuses, as he told Father Murray, that he had not put. We got to go back to Father Murray now. That the Lord of the Rings was fundamentally religious and Catholic, unconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. I don't know what he means by consciously in the revision, although I think we'll get closer to that when we deal with the ring itself. To be continued. But the religious element absorbed in the story and the symbolism. If you haven't started reading your Bibles with this sort of, the entire Lord of the Rings is based on the Old Testament in particular. I hope you are. And paying attention to the strength of the mythology that's embedded, I'm not saying coded, it's just embedded in the language of the Old Testament, and would have been familiar, and was, I'm promising you, you're all going to want to become medievalists after this, I hope, used throughout the Middle Ages, and therefore in the text that Tolkien was working with in his scholarship, so that there's this kind of infinitely richer mythological language behind every character than simple sort of, the Galadriel's the Virgin Mary makes in any sense. It's not that. It's Galadriel is taking on characteristics that are wisdom, and she becomes wiser, and she becomes most wise in the moment in which she refuses the temptation to become the queen, which is lovely and fascinating. And I think, it's there's a poignancy and a loveliness to Tolkien's trying to show us Christianity through what it's not, right? And to say this, it's like the Virgin Mary is not understood as a goddess. That matters. She's understood as the creature in whom the Creator became incarnate. Going back to our previous video when I was talking about that meditation that Finrod, Galadriel's brother, and Andreth have about what would it mean for the Creator to enter into his work, that the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion become the more Christian, the more they resist the more they show the way Christianity resists becoming the kind of mythology that everybody wants it to default to, right? It's like, oh yeah, the Virgin Mary, she's this goddess queen of the morning and heavens and such, and Galadriel is most like her when she refuses those titles, which is very, very interesting, because the other thing that Galadriel is, of course, associated with, she's the light of her hair, which Gimli then puts into the crystal that he makes to hold. He's going to make a little reliquary for her hair, right, which is appropriate. The other thing that she's associated with is, of course, baking the limbess. This is from a letter from 1958 to Deborah Webster, and again, Tolkien acknowledging the Catholic element in his story and pointing to Galadriel again. She's constantly there. It's like Galadriel is, he every time somebody says, "Oh, your work's Catholic," he's like, "Oh yeah, Galadriel." He says, where does the story come from? What kinds of things? He's like, well, for instance, I was born in 1892 and lived for my early years in the Shire at pre-mechanical age. Or more important, I am a Christian, which can be deduced from my stories, right? Say, he thinks that his stories are so Christian you can deduce it from them. And in fact, a Roman Catholic. The latter fact perhaps cannot be deduced, though one critic by letter asserted that the invocations of Elbereth and the character of Galadriel, as directly described or through the words of Gimli and Sam, were clearly related to Catholic devotion to Mary. Another saw in waybread, limbas, viaticum, in the reference to its feeding the will and be more potent when fasting, a derivation from the Eucharist. Parentheses, that is, far greater things may color the mind in dealing with the lesser things of a fairy story. I am recording today on the Feast of Corpus Christi, and the readings for today, or at least in my reading of Guéranger's liturgical year, included this passage that I shared with you from Proverbs, and saying it's in fact describing our Lord as the wisdom, the Logos, which is another of the mysteries that folds into the devotion to the Virgin Mary, that she is such a perfect mirror of her Son, in whose image and likeness she's made, that she is the wisdom, the mother of wisdom, and she carries within her, as in an ark, the bread of life. And Galadriel and her ladies are the ones who baked the limbus, the bread of life, for the hobbits, that viaticum which helped them survive their journey through Mordor. Fundamentally religious and Catholic. The symbolism folds in on itself and then blossoms forth like a beautiful flower. To be continued. Thank you for joining me.